You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa.
A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
Snow, we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow.
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Madison.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
All right, good evening, everyone. We are live. It's episode 7 of The Weather Junkies, and this evening we are coming on. It's obviously a Tuesday. Normally we come on a Wednesday, but a lot of things going on. Obviously it's busy, heading towards the Christmas season, and Dakota himself has finals week, so we're joining you live on this Tuesday evening. We have an action-packed show. As always, our special guest this night is a meteorologist from the National Weather Service. His name is Andy Horvitz. Good evening, Andy. How are you?
Good evening. Nice to talk to you, and I'm excited to be on the show tonight.
All right, great to have you. And Dakota is also joining us, as he always does, from Colorado. Dakota, are you there?
Hello. Out here in Fort Collins, Colorado, with a fresh 8 inches of snow on the ground. It was a little bit of a surprise. We went under a winter storm warning. I think it was about 8 o'clock last night, and then boom, midnight it started snowing, and didn't stop until the afternoon today. So that's great. Out here, as you know, I love snow. I hear the weather is a little different out there.
It is. So for any new listeners and for Andy, we start out the show with a discussion of the weather in our backyards. Then we'll go through some tweets, and then we'll get to the main topic of the show and have Andy join us again then. But Andy, if you'd like to just step in at any point before then as we're going through the tweets, maybe you can add something, feel free to do so, and we would welcome that. But yeah, Dakota, the weather here continues to be exceptionally warm. It's really crazy. We're on track to have the warmest December on record. Normally I'd shy away from saying that only halfway through the month, but the projections here as we go into the rest of the month are almost off the charts. So it's pretty likely that we'll end up with at least a top 5 warmest December in 110 years. That is for the Hartford area. A lot of people enjoying it, some not so much, especially the ski areas and the ski resorts. But I just did a special today, actually, looking forward to next week, and more records are in jeopardy. So definitely a difference. We don't have any snow in sight.
Yeah, I've heard some rumbling and grumblings from some of the snow junkies out there. And I've heard some jokes, they're not going to see a flake until 2017. So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully you guys get something later in the winter, because as a fellow snow junkie, I feel bad.
Yeah, the opinion I have is I love snow, I love big storms, that's my favorite thing to forecast, but if it came down to either 1 inch of snow or extreme warmth, by all means I would take the extreme warmth. I enjoy the extremes, whether that's cold or it's warm or it's snow or it's rain. I'd rather have that than a wind-driven 1 inch of snow that blows in your face and really does nothing. So,
well, speaking of warmth, that leads us right into our next segment, weather in the Twitterverse. And our first tweet is from familiar to you, at least, and familiar to me. It's Weather World, which is broadcast from Penn State. You can follow them at Weatherworld at Weatherworld PSU. Their tweet is, you're in a warm pattern when a cold front passes and temperatures are still 10 degrees above average.
Yeah, remarkable tweet. This is actually a graphic from the E-Wall created by the one and only Fred Gadomski. And this shows departure from the 1981 to 2010 average period for the whole country, plots some major stations. I'll open this in a new tab and we'll make it bigger so that it's easier to see. But basically anywhere you see the red shading is temperatures that are above average, and the cool shading, the blue colors, are below. Not a lot of blue on the map. And the cold front that came through I don't remember what the surface map looked like at the time, but if I had to guess, it looks like it was slicing through western Pennsylvania at the time. You have the maroon shades of numbers to the east, and you have pinkish shades to the west. You know, normally the 11 in Indianapolis would be really warm, 11 above average, but not in comparison to the 28 above average in Albany. So it just goes to show you the magnitude of warmth that we've been dealing with. Even a cold front that, you know, means business. It's actually changing the temperature, cannot put us back to average levels.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I like this map because normally when you get a map like this, it's, you know, fine to the front and it's usually pretty obvious. But on this map, it's not nearly as obvious as a cleared, you know, 20-degree, 10-degree drop where it's super cold on one side and a little bit warm on the other. So let's get into our next tweet. This is from Brian Von Cleef. He's the executive producer of Weather and News at CBS 5 in Arizona. And his tweet is, Tyler, I think you're sharing your video.
Right I am?
Sorry. His tweet is, Snowbowl credits snowmaking and El Nino for opening 80% of the resort and making it a record month. So as El Nino is hampering snow in the northeast and eastern part of the United States, it's actually giving some snow to some areas, particularly in the west, especially in the Pacific Northwest and some of the parts of the Southwest.
Yeah, and the reason I chose this tweet was because so much of the country is dealing with warmth, but in some parts, especially western areas of the country, El Nino actually benefits the ski areas with snow, and that's exactly the case here in this photo in Arizona. I believe this Snowbowl is in Flagstaff, so not everyone has a torch.
At least someone can enjoy the snow. I saw a funny tweet earlier from Eric Fisher, and he said the snow was a gift from the east to the west for Christmas, and obviously some places in the west, specifically the Nevadas and California, really need it. Tyler, take us into our next tweet.
Yes, our next and our last tweet, short Twitter segment this week, is from Ben Knoll. It looks like he used to work at AccuWeather, but he's making a major move to New Zealand to work for this new company. And so best of luck to him, but his tweet says, modeling-wise, the European continues to dominate globally. In fact, skill scores are likely to increase with an early 2016 upgrade. It's almost hard to keep track of all the upgrades that are going into the models because there are so many models, but the European, at least power-wise and computing-wise, continues to lead the pack, at least ahead of the GFS, and the plot that he shows is the 500 millibar skill scores, I believe, or some kind of 500 millibar way of analyzing all the models here listed on the bottom. And the European is represented by these little red triangles, and you can see, you look left to right from November to December, most of the time the red triangles are at the top of the graph. And so it continues to lead the pack, even with an upgrade impending, looming next year. I do know that there's a big resolution upgrade. Obviously, a lot more goes into a model than just resolution. I haven't read through all of the stats on the upgrade, but it's bound to be an even better model after the upgrade.
I don't. I hope we didn't offend the National Weather Service employee on our show talking about the Euro. But yeah, I mean, it's always good to see model upgrades. And
another reason I included this is because I don't know if it's unfortunate or if it's fortunate, but it seems to me that an awful large percentage of the public now knows what European and GFS means, which is a little alarming.
Yeah, that was. I believe Sandy was kind of the precursor to that.
Yeah. And that's our last tweet. So it is a quick Twitter segment, but we have a really important main segment tonight. So we want to dedicate a lot of our time to that, right?
Yeah. Let's get into it. So we'll invite back Andy into the conversation Andy's a meteorologist at the National Weather Service at NOAA headquarters in Silver Spring, and a quick Google search of some of the things you've done. It sounds like you have your hands in a lot of different aspects of forecasting and communications. So Andy, I was hoping to start the segment off with just a little idea of what you do at the National Weather Service.
Yeah, sure, Tyler and Dakota. It's, again, thank you for joining me. And by the way, on your Trending the Weather, one item I thought I'd just pass on. We were saying that the weather is unseasonably warm in the east. There is an exception. Across far northern Maine, they have winter storm warnings up for last night, and today they had some snow and freezing rain, which was actually, snow is welcome up there. They were actually bare ground up until yesterday. They had some snow, but most of the years they have 150 inches annually. So they only have, I believe, 9.5 going into today. So they're still way behind the curve. So I work in the newly reorganized National Weather Service headquarters in the Office of Analyzed Forecasts and Support. And we're rearranged really now with very transparent, with our budget structure in line with our various portfolios, such as observations, central processing, dissemination, and of course science technology integration. And we work in the analyze and forecast, and specifically I work in the forecast services division. And I'm the National Public Program Lead, and we have 11 program leads in the National Weather Service, everything from tsunami to hydro to marine to winter weather, just to name a few. And our role here is to work very closely with our Weather Service headquarters and with our regional offices and our WFOs, and we work on updating our policy instructions and working very closely. And one major project that I'm working on, which is why I'm on the show here that I was invited for, talk about the hazard simplification, and I'll be happy to go into that in a little more detail. So again, the key here is also we respond to users. We have a number of users that contact us on a day-to-day basis, and actually I enjoy that as much as anything, because when you can deal one-on-one with the users of our data, it really hits home, and I think that's very important as well. So I think those are two key things: working directly with the users, and certainly working with our field offices, because they're the ones that run the railroad. And the idea is to make our life easier for them, so they can provide more accurate forecasts for the public and the media and everyone else that's impacted by weather.
So a very interesting role that you have, and one of the reasons that we started thinking about this topic, not that we hadn't thought about it before, but last week there was a lot of fog in the Northeast, and in New York and Pennsylvania specifically, the fog was freezing fog. There was a lot of accidents and issues because of the fog, and someone on Twitter, one of our friends actually, tweeted to the National Weather Service in State College and was wondering why a freezing fog advisory wasn't issued, or if it could be issued in an inland location. And the initial response from the weather office on Twitter was that didn't exist in inland areas. It was a marine product and they couldn't issue it. But because the fog was so frequent and reoccurring, the person issuing the warnings realized, oh yes, you can issue the freezing fog advisory. It's in a little category called lesser used or whatever, some other little drop down that you had to go into, and it made us think, do we have too many warnings, or is it too complex, or do we need to completely rethink how the warning system is run? And I know this has been a topic that has come up an awful lot, especially as it relates to tornadoes. So I would say our first question that we could get into is a brief overview. Basically, what can you tell us as in regards to an overview of what the project wants to accomplish in the end?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. And actually, on that freezing fog, we did see that it's very unusual this time of year, but in the east, because we had with the big ridge, and in the wintertime with those long nights, a lot of moisture in the air, very high dew points, and and it caused a lot of fog to form. And of course, in some areas where you had radiational cooling, temperatures were close enough to freezing. I did actually see some freezing fog advisories across Ohio and Indiana also earlier last week. So that product does issue. But overall, as far as the project, the whole idea here is hazard simplification. Let's simplify our hazard messaging. And it really came to mind many years ago when we were, Eli and I were looking at the weather for the day on the weather.gov, and you could see, in fact, you could see it many times today, the western U.S. lit up like a Christmas tree with all the watches and warnings and advisories. And what really came to mind was a piece actually that David Letterman did about 7 years ago on one of his top 10 hits he does on his show, and he did it on the watch warning advisory system of the Weather Service, because you have a watch and a watch and a warning and a warning, and he was doing it real quickly, speaking very quickly, and everybody was sort of laughing, and in a way he was right, because there is a lot of confusion. So we actually did a simplification back in 2012. And we simplified a number of our products, especially in the water side and in the winter side. If you recall, years ago, we used to have what we called a heavy snow warning.
Yes, the fancy heavy snow warning.
Right, and that no longer exists. Right, that's now part of winter storm warning, exactly. So we did do a initial product reduction. We also did it a little bit on the water side. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. So it's not only the fact that there's a huge number of products, and actually is 122 products, which actually coincidentally matches all our WFOs.
I was going to say that.
That there also is the need to determine the impact and the risk of what the message is. And so we worked back in 2014 and worked. This is really a social science. A lot of social sciences goes into this, and this is where the Weather Service has really moved forward in the last several years. You know, you think of the Weather Service, you think of a lot of meteorologists, yes, but really we also work with very closely social science, because a lot of what we ultimately will turn to, they have the insight and the knowledge of what the public is looking at from a science standpoint. And you know, we have two social sciences. We have Eastern Research Group, who is working with us on this project, Gina Esco out of Cornell University and Linda Girardi, and they have really helped us as far as how we're going to work actually on a roadmap and how we're going to move forward on this. So what we've done is back in 2014, we did a public focus groups around the country, 4 different regions of the country. We talked to different users. We talked to emergency managers and how they view our current watch warning advisory system. We talked to broadcast media. We talked to the actual forecasters and the public. So we did this in Anchorage. We did it in Houston, Minneapolis, and in the Washington, D.C. area. And we had a lot of interesting ideas that came out of there, and a number of them said, well, in a way, we understand what watch warning and advisory is, but then ultimately when we asked them what it actually meant with an advisory, like a winter weather advisory, they were not really knowledgeable what it really meant. Now, there were some differences, especially from the regard of watch and warning, especially from the tropical and the convective side, where there was a lot more knowledge, like what a tornado watch is, more so than what a winter storm watch is. So it was more the short-term duration where there was more understanding than the sort of the long-term. So we worked very diligently. We actually did a non-operational test at a number of WFOs in 2013, and we looked at using different language, because ultimately what you're going to look at are there different words that convey the impact and the risk to the user. So in other words, instead of saying an advisory, can you say the word take caution? And for a warning, you could say, for a watch, you could say be prepared. A warning, you could even look at it on how difficult or how important a warning is, like an emergency. We get into the situation in some of the extreme events, such as the 2012 derecho that impacted the mid-Atlantic states, the June 29th event. We heard from a number of broadcasters that were frustrated, where they knew there were going to be severe thunderstorm warnings issued, but they didn't have the time on air to really emphasize to the public this was not going to be your run-of-the-mill severe thunderstorm. This was going to be damaging thunderstorm winds that could cause fatalities. And so the question even there from a severe weather side, now we do have PDS, for particularly dangerous storms. But this is another example. We also saw, of course, with the child, the overall, the one case was Superstorm Sandy, where initially it was tropical, and then we use the word extra tropical, which we really don't like to use because that can be misconstrued. What does really extra mean? So there was movement there. So what we've done is we presented at the American Meteorological Society, and in this past year, in October in Kansas City, we had 115 meteorologists as well as social scientists, emergency managers, the broadcast media, and the weather and climate industry come up with various prototypes that we can demonstrate of different ways of looking at watch, warning, and advisory, and that's really what we looked at. This was based on, we had a public survey. We had over 800 case studies sent to us from the various user groups, plus internally, on different ways of just, first of all, looking at the current system. What can we do better, and are there better ways of doing it? And right now we're analyzing. Our social scientists are looking at it, and we're going to look at about several of them to see if down the road we can do, in the next year or so, non-operational tests of some of these prototypes and compare it with the current system. A couple of the important points that came out of our workshop was a reduction in the number of products. Obviously, as I said, we don't need 122 products. And also, can we improve the language of the wording to hit the home on the message? In other words, like I just said with tornado, we can say tornado emergency. We can use different color schemes that have looked at. We have internationally, the meteor alarm system in Europe is used by 33 countries, and they use a 4-color system, and they use a matrix that's based on certainty and what degree of certainty and what degree of impact. And that's important because ultimately, if you remember the Snowmageddon storm back in 2010,
I was there.
Okay, there you go. So if you looked at that, all we had to alert the public 7 days ahead was a hazardous weather outlook. And the question is now, if we had a different type of hazard messaging system, we could say that maybe the impact would be huge, but since it's so far out, the confidence level would be low. And as the storm became closer, the confidence level would increase to moderate or maybe even high. So we're looking at those type of things. So, excuse me?
Is the product used by Sterling, is that the winter weather product, the new product that's, I guess, they're testing, and it's kind of like the SBC outlooks, is that from your guys' project? Was that a part of the implementation?
Okay, in other words, Sterling currently is looking at a winter weather threat index, and that falls off on this type of looking at impacts and risks. It's not specifically a prototype that we have specifically looked at, because again, what we're looking at is to impact for all types of hazards. And ultimately, when we move forward, we're going to look at all types of hazards. Not just winter. We're focused right now on winter. So what Sterling is doing is encouraging, because ultimately we want to, the users want to know ultimately what type of impacts we're looking at. So the whole idea of what they're trying to do is something that is the movement towards what the public is wanting. So We're excited. What we want to do, though, ultimately is have a consistent national winter hazard and actually national hazard outlook, whichever way we ultimately come up with. So we want it across all hazards. We don't want ultimately 122 offices doing each one differently. We ultimately want a consistent message. But what they're looking at in each office, in some of these offices, is encouraging from that standpoint, because that's something that is what we're trying to ultimately do.
Gotcha. So there's a lot. I have a lot of questions because there's a lot of content here. But one thing I believe I actually attended one of your presentations, or it might have been Eli actually, at AMS, and it got me thinking about the tornado watch, warning, and emergency. Those are kind of like the 3 levels for a tornado warning, and it kind of made me think about the winter aspect of it, and why a winter storm watch and warning are called winter storm, but why it's called a winter weather advisory instead of like a winter storm advisory. I don't know if that's something that you guys have addressed at all. It might be a tough question, but I was curious about if maybe you're leaning away from advisories. It seems like those are the ones that people don't understand the best.
You hit it right on the nail. Some of the feedback we've received from our surveys, as well as from our hazard simplification workshop, was advisory was the least understood of the 3 terms. There is also some confusion between watch and warning because they both start with a W. And even in the real world, the daily world, if you get stopped by a police officer and he gives you a ticket, he will give you. What will he give you? A watch or a warning, right? It's not what we use with our terminology in watch and warning, so it's a little different there. So, and the W's sometimes get mixed up. But we also have to be sensitive to the current structure with warning. There are some institutionalized parts of the warning structure for insurance purposes, like if we have a hurricane evacuation, there are laws based in, both state and local laws on even evacuation. And if we eliminated the word warning and went to something else, we have to be sensitive to that. We can't just make a change on that. This has to be done with due diligence and a lot of thought and a lot of testing. And ultimately, the whole idea here is we have to simplify it to make it better than the current system. And that's what we're trying to do.
All right, I have the next question. We have a question in from Twitter, and it's from a meteorologist here in Connecticut on TV. His name is Aaron Arjun. He has a question that says, what percentage of the public knows the difference between a watch and warning and how to react? Do you have any hard numbers on that?
No, I don't have any hard numbers. That's a very good question. And I would just say that I believe there still is confusion between watch and warning. But I don't know what the numbers are. But that's something we can investigate.
We also have a tweet from Dave Hayes. He's on Twitter at DHTheWeatherNut from Western Massachusetts, and he says that he loved the heavy snow warning. He doesn't know, but he thinks he might be strange in that he'd rather use his brain. He's sick of the dumb down. I think probably some weather junkies would agree, weather fans, meteorologists, but I think the reality is a lot of the public doesn't understand, and that's who we're gearing the weather alerts to, not necessarily to meteorologists.
Well, it's an interesting take, and we appreciate that question. But what we could do now under hazard simplification is say a winter storm with heavy snow, and we could actually explain some of the impacts there. Start it right off. Heavy snow accumulating 12 to 18 inches, knocking potential loss of power. We could use certain messages that so the public would understand what the risk is of that heavy snow right off the bat, rather than going through a very long, lengthy message, and indicate the time of day. And the other area where hazard simplification can come in is oftentimes, and we see it here locally in the Washington area, of course, the first inch of snow can sometimes set off panic. But it's not only so much the first inch for the first time of the year, but also the time of day. The timing is so critical on some of these even small-scale events in the Mid-Atlantic and the South, where 1 inch of snow at rush hour is a huge difference than 1 inch on a weekend. And right now, the criteria would be an advisory, where, again, the public would be confused. If we came out with a special statement or some type of hazard or communication saying, rush hour, severely impacted, people would take notice, would maybe leave early or stay until the event, the roads were treated, etc. Because we had that challenging event that was had huge impact in Atlanta, I believe last winter. Same type of deal where they had a couple inches of snow, and how we communicate this is going to ultimately help us save a lot of money and frustration for users, and make our lives safer.
One issue that is particularly familiar here in Connecticut is we're a very small state. You're from Rhode Island. But in Connecticut, currently, we're covered by 3 National Weather Service offices. One in Albany only covers Litchfield County in the northwest. Boston covers the northeastmost 3 counties, and all 4 southern counties are covered by the National Weather Service office on Long Island. Very often, the state is not consistently covered by the same weather alert, even though sometimes the forecast is the same, and maybe there should be an alert, or a winter storm is moving in, and half the state has a winter storm warning. One, in the last quarter of the state is split up with either a winter weather advisory or a winter storm watch, and it's just a huge mess. What would you say about that going forward, or what would the goal be to maybe not have that happen?
Well, there are a couple areas here. First, it could be, where an event comes in and there's a huge difference in weather conditions across the areas. So there could be a need for different types of, different forecasts for different areas, as you're well aware of. In Connecticut, you can have a huge difference between the Berkshires areas and the hills north of Hartford than you would along the south coast. However, there certainly, if we went to a different type of hazard simplification ultimately, where we have less products, the messages could be all consistent, and the wording might be just somewhat different depending on the areas. Okay, and that would be one way to look at it. Also, our offices, we're working a lot in the digital area on grid consistency between offices. They do use a lot of NWS. We have a chat where they coordinate and collaborate, and also with our national centers, Weather Prediction Center. And we're working to try to improve our spatial and temporal resolution with the grids, which is the National Forecast Digital Database. So I think in 2 ways down the road we're going to be better at that. One is the consistency effort with our forecast grids, with the basic elements that we forecast, all the weather grids, etc. But you got to remember, there's also a huge challenge on update. Sometimes on update time, when we're updating, especially in a high impact situation, the offices are updating consistently, and sometimes something may not be exactly as updated in one area as in with another. So we're trying to improve that, and I think ultimately, if we have less products and just explain the risk and the impacts, you'll see a more consistent message all across, especially in these type of areas.
So this might be kind of a redundant question, but I want to kind of give kind of a overview of what we've talked about and maybe where the project's going. So I listened to a presentation by Dr. Gina, hope I'm saying this right, Iesco?
Yes.
Iesco. And she was talking about some of the possibilities of the watch warning advisory system. Maybe just a tweak, maybe something as simple as getting rid of advisories and calling them something different, or a complete overhaul of the system. And my question for you is, do you have an idea of where that might be going, and when you think the project, I guess not finished, but a lot of the work to be done in the future?
Yes, and again, a very good question. Where we're planning is we're looking at 3 areas. One is a total transformation, which would be changing our entire watch warning advisory. We're still looking at that option on the table. As I was saying, we have a number of case studies the social scientists are looking at. They're analyzing, plus several of these prototypes. So we're going to be looking at that. And some of these prototypes will help determine are we going to go to a total transformation over the next couple of years. Now, this is not an easy step. You have to incorporate it ultimately. How you're going to incorporate it into AWIP's dissemination. It's a huge effort. But if it's something we need to do, we're going to do it. We're going to do it right. That's one effort. The other is on a shorter path, and this was mentioned at the workshop, is what quick changes can we make? It's sort of as a repair mode. In other words, we are looking at various policy instructions with our national program leads, and we're working through our regions throughout the entire Weather Service of possibly improving the messaging, so it's not as lengthy, and coming up with better words to explain some of the hazards, and also trying to reduce some of the products. So we're looking at that as a short-term repair. And as far as the word watch and advisory, there is some look. We are looking at advisory, but we also still have to look at if we get rid of advisory and replace it, we have to make sure we replace it with something that is better than what we have, and that the word advisory is not institutionalized. Just like I remember I was talking about the hurricane warning, where we were involved with evacuation. We have to be very careful, but it is one of the words out there that could change. And again, from a watch standpoint, what word do we use? That's where social science and Gina's work and Linda's work with our social, they're helping us on that. So we're on this every day, and we've made some great progress, and I think you're going to see some benefits out of this over the next couple of years.
We have a question from Twitter now, Anthony Piccoli. I hope I pronounced that right. And this was actually a question I was going to ask, so this will be one of my final questions. Great way to wrap up my part. He says, severe thunderstorm warnings are issued for both hail and straight-line wind. Could they split that warning up? My part of the question would be, it seems like there's a large number of severe thunderstorm warnings that are issued that don't verify. And so severe thunderstorm warning, at least in this part of the country, means almost nothing. I mean, no one really flinches, as far as I know, when there's one issued. So that's part of the question. The other part is, could they be split up?
Okay, as far as split up, I would say, that's going to have to be a decision the Storm Prediction Center and our various scientists will have to look at for criteria when we analyze that. And so I'm not just, that's something that could happen, but I don't, that has to be analyzed and looked at. There are some false alarms. I do take, some, I don't know, I don't want to say pushback, but in the East where we say, people don't really follow severe thunderstorm warnings, to me, I go back to that day of the derecho where if you had been looking, there were a lot of severe thunderstorm warnings, and it actually should have been emphasized more so. In fact, when we do get it in the East and people aren't even aware of it that much, I would think it would be the opposite, where you even need to take it more seriously. True, you won't get generally the supercells that you will, but you can on occasion. Every state in the country has had tornadoes, so I wouldn't take any severe thunderstorm warning lightly. Anytime you have a warning, there's a reason for that, and it's a reason to be prepared.
All right, well, I feel like I could talk with you about this forever, just because there's so much to sink our teeth into. But we're on a little bit of a time constraint, so we wanted to keep it a little shorter. So thank you for talking about the HazSimp project. I wanted to end the show with kind of more of a lighter question. So throughout your career, you've worked AccuWeather, National Weather Service. You've done a lot with the remote sensing. So I finish the show with this every time, with every guest. What skill do you think was most important and is most important right now in your career?
I think the thing is not necessarily the skill, but the skill of listening to others and learning. That you can always learn. Doesn't matter if you're just born or you're 90 years old. If you learn something every day, it's good. And I always say it's good to try something new. And if you have an opportunity, especially in science, meteorology, like I said, there's a lot of effort now in social science and different parts of the field. Where there's a lot of different needs now, and especially with technology. So always keep your eyes open and try to make yourself an asset to others. I find that's always very valuable. And from a weather standpoint, you have to have the passion, and I know everybody that's on this show does, and that's number one.
I love the sentiment right there. Listen, learn, and have the passion. Andy, thank you very much for joining us tonight and taking some time out of your night.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much for listening, anyone out there that's still on. And if you want to listen to this show, not just on YouTube, you can check us out on iTunes, and we're newly on the Stitcher app, which is a great app if you don't have an iPhone. For Android. We're not on SoundCloud right now, but we may go back to it. We'll keep you updated on that. You can follow us on Twitter at the WX Junkies, and you can find us on Facebook as well. Tyler, any last thoughts?
No, I think we should again thank Andy for coming on the show, and we look forward to following the developments that come across when it comes to our warning system in the future. And that'll do it for this week's episode of the Weather Junkies. We have completed our episode 7 on a special Tuesday night, but of course you can listen to the show on demand, and that is one of our pillars of the show. We have a live edition, but we also want you to be able to watch it back and review what we have gone over in the past. And again, we are going to end this show for this week. If you have any further questions or comments, you can send them in on Facebook or Twitter, and we will do our best to answer them. But for Andy, Dakota, and myself, that will do for this evening. Have a great night.